Hello and welcome to episode number 88 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. In episode number 88, we are going to be covering some amazing things. Tapestry. Hot takes. It's happening. It's so good that I am opening this episode. In addition, we're going to be covering the top 5 games of Essen SPIEL that we wish that we could buy if we were going to Essen SPIEL, but we are not because we are going to Shucks 2019.
2019.
In Vancouver, a beautiful room 606 of...
Yeah, let's hope.
Yeah, one can only hope. But Christina will be in the room, the blue tank.
Blue tank. 4-tank army.
So let us start with the games that we have played this week. We will save the anticipated Tapestry discussion for last. Mark, why don't we start with you? Let's talk about whatever boring train game you want to talk about this week.
I do have a train game that I'm going to be talking about, but it is not boring. I got a copy of the new version of Irish Gauge. This is from Capstone Games, although it was originally a Winsome game, and the designer is Tom Russell, who still runs Holland Spiel. That's a little board game background, in case you're interested.
Is that another city name with play on the end?
Yeah. Holland Play.
Holland?
Yeah.
The country?
Yeah. Oh, I guess it's not a city. There may be a town in Germany called Holland. Who knows? Anyway, Irish Gauge is a train game really only in theme. It is not a train game like an 18XX game or anything of the like. It's really more of an auction economic game. First thing I'm going to say about it is super fast, which is great. With teaching, our first game ran, I think, under 60 minutes. So that's awesome. It's a map of Ireland that you see. It's a hex-based map of Ireland. And there are 5 companies that are in the game. Each company starts in its own city on the map. And the game starts by auctioning off shares of the company, 1 share of each of the 5 companies. Whoever owns that initial share of a company can run track for that company, basically. And so on your turn, after the companies have been auctioned for, you can do one of 4 things. You can put up any share of any company up for auction. The interesting thing about the shares in this game is that companies have variable number of shares. So some companies have 2 shares. The company with the most shares has 4 shares. So it's a very limited quantity of shares, which is sort of interesting. So you can put up a share for auction, any share you want, which when you're talking about that few shares available on the market makes for very impactful auctions. The next thing you can do is build track. Building track is very straightforward. You get 3 points of building on the map. And if you build on plain standard hexes, it costs 1 point. If you build on difficult hexes, it costs 2 points of your 3 points. And if you go onto a hex that somebody is already on, so you can share the same hex as somebody else, but it's 1.5 points. So there's like a very rudimentary calculation as to whether or not, you want to go 3 hexes that are maybe out of your way, but you're not forced to cross anybody, which would cost more points. Just a little interesting tweak, which I think is very effective in this game. The third thing you can do is upgrade a town. So there are cities and there are towns. Cities all are randomly assigned one of 3 color cubes, either black, white, or pink. So on your turn, you can upgrade a town, which is a spot on the board that does not have a cube on it. When you upgrade a town, take any cube that's available and put it on that town, and therefore it's a city. Now it's one of the cities that has a cube on it, which now leads me to the last thing you can do, which is call for dividends. Calling for dividends is scoring all the railroads and all the tracks in the game. And what you do is you draw 3 cubes from a bag. Again, the 3 colors are white, black, and pink. Now, it doesn't matter how many of a color of a cube comes out. It just means that color will score. So you could draw 3 white cubes, and it just means white scores once. It's equivalent to just having white being drawn once. And then whatever color or colors come out, every city that has that color scores. If the blue railroad crosses 2 white cities and 1 pink city, for example, and 3 white cubes have been pulled, then that railroad will score white twice because white scores and it goes through 2 white cities. Okay? Here's the interesting thing. There's a very small supply of these cubes. So if you are big into a railroad that has white cities and then you draw 3 white cubes, great, white is going to score, but now the chances that white scores again is decreased a lot. And then there's also the added twist that, okay, I see that Kellen is in pink cities. His railroads cross through pink cities. I might, for my turn, make a town a pink city just to take one of the pink cubes out of the economy.
Okay.
And if you do that late, say, again, Kellen has a railroad that runs through 3 pink cities. So if pink comes up, he's going to score. But the number of cubes is always open information. So if I see there's only one more pink cube, and I use that cube to make a town into a pink city, pink is not going to score for the rest of the game. It's a really brutal, tight, interesting decision. And just the whole game is that. The whole game is like just very tight decisions.
It's interesting because like on the surface when you describe the grab bag thing, that struck me as incredibly surprising for this type of game.
Right.
Do you find like the randomness of the pulls is that big a factor? Because it sounds like, in contrast to that, the way you can manipulate the number of cubes feels to be a much bigger part. So do you think those like balance each other out?
Right. Well, so the manipulation is a big thing that you can do that really hurts somebody, but also it's like your full turn, right?
Okay.
So it can hurt somebody a lot, but I think there are plenty of ways to mitigate your position by buying stock in another company.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So there are ways to mitigate your position, but yeah, a bad draw will really hurt, not you, if you've played it, I think,
Okay.
but a company for sure.
Sure, okay.
You know what I mean? So the idea is like,
Still kind of surprising to me.
yeah, I guess, but the saving grace for all this is that this is a 45-minute game.
Okay, sure.
So, like, if this was a 3-hour game, yeah, I might have those feelings, but I really, really, really enjoyed this game.
Okay,
because
that's perfect then, because like that sort of random screw, for lack of a better word, in like you said, in a 45-minute game makes for a fun game versus one that would just be punishing.
Here's another thing. It's very rare, I think, that for a lot of the game, certainly for the beginning, but for the meat of the game, I think there's going to be a lot of intermingling in terms of company ownership. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you're going to find yourself as like, hey, I'm the pink guy.
Sure.
So like it might be a situation where one of the 4 players or 2 of the 4 players could be gunning for you, but one player is going to be backing you, basically.
Got it.
So there's that mitigation that way.
And the other thing also is interesting is the way you said, because it's all open information, you effectively know which companies are more likely to pay out as the game progresses.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's a really tight game that's just like designed wonderfully. I'm just looking forward to playing again. And I love how fast it plays. 45 minutes and you're out, and it's a fantastic game. So.
I'm super excited for this. I think Capstone are quickly becoming like one of my favorite people in the industry. Like, I know this is not an original title of theirs, but it's still just cool to see it resurface.
Yeah, whatever Capstone produces or chooses to reproduce, which they've done a number of times, goes to the top of my list.
Yeah.
So I guess all the hype for this, I guess I'm wondering, Chicago Express you can frequently find for like $12 on Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's a very short train game. So how does this feel different than that? And what makes you excited about
it? It feels super different than that. Because Chicago Express, I feel, is like 18xx, light. You own a company, you put money into their account, and you run it that way. This has none of that. This is a completely different experience than Chicago Express, and than any train game. It's not like a train game, except for the theme,
Trains.
the theme and the laying out of the track. But even that is much different.
I want like a hypercut of you just saying 18xx over like the last 10 episodes.
I hate editing myself saying 18xx because I never get that second X.
You don't like your pronunciation of it?
No, I always stumble over the second X.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
So that is Irish Gauge by Tom Russell and Capstone Games.
Cool. The game I want to talk about this week is Heroes of Terrinoth by Fantasy Flight Games. This is a game...
It's a train game, right?
It's definitely a train game.
Actually, one thing, like Heroes of Terrinoth, Shadows of Brimstone, something else, like all these games, they all feel like a one thing in my head, like one D&D novel.
Yeah,
like
this is the curse that has plagued sort of medieval fantasy board games and video games for forever, where it's just the X of mysterious land.
Right. Yeah,
and
okay.
It's,
sorry,
colon something else.
Sure.
But Heroes of Terrinoth is set in Fantasy Flight's much beloved, lore-filled, deep, rich, everyone goes crazy for Terrinoth Descent universe, I guess. This is Fantasy Flight's in-house fantasy property.
Ripoff.
Yes, and that's especially appropriate to talk about in the context of this, because Heroes of Terrinoth is a remake of Warhammer Quest, the adventure card game. Fantasy Flight had the license to Warhammer. They lost it famously about 2 or 3 years ago, and they wanted to re-release this game under a new design. So Heroes of Terrinoth is their solution to that. There are a few changes that I'll talk about, but this is essentially the same game for all intents and purposes. It doesn't have the Warhammer theme, so I was definitely sort of trepidatious going in because I have much affinity for Warhammer and I have zero affinity for Terrinoth. I've not played any other game in that realm, in fact. Okay, what is Warhammer Quest? What is Heroes of Terrinoth? The way this works, it is a co-op game for up to 4 players. You're each choosing a fantasy class, and these are the basic archetypes. So you'll have a tank, a mage, a healer, a scout, or a ranger. And they each have different properties, like some might be able to do ranged attacks, some might be able to heal, some are going to be better at sort of absorbing damage. But your characters are all represented by decks of cards. So at the start of the game, everyone has 4 basic card archetypes. They are attack, aid, rest, and explore. Each character class has slightly different variations of what those cards do, but the main action of each of them is going to be the same. Monsters come out into the middle of the dungeon, and if you take an attack action, you're either going to be pulling monsters towards you by sort of grabbing the card, dealing damage to them, rolling some dice, depending on how many dice your card tells you to roll. So at the start of the game, this is typically 2. Scoring hits on them, killing them, that sort of basic thing. Explore is how you're going to be progressing through the dungeon. So this is replicating a dungeon crawl type of game. Each scenario, I don't know how many there are in the box, but there are a bunch of them, and they're designed to be repeatable because there's some variation each time you play them. Each scenario is represented by a bunch of different location cards. So the first location card might need 7 progress in order to get through it. There are special effects that happen that are normally negative every turn that you haven't completed the location. The exploration card is about rolling dice in order to get successes in order to advance down that location. So the basic mechanic of the cards is the same deal. You roll white success dice based on the strength of your card, and you roll black enemy dice based on how many enemies are engaged with you. So there's sort of like a press your luck balance of how many creatures are in front of you versus what you're trying to accomplish with your successes. So if you have more creatures in front of you, you might want to try push them away first before rolling those black dice because you're more likely to get hit. The aid action, you're rolling success dice in order to give other players success tokens, so it's a way to sort of boost other players. And then finally, the rest action is how you sort of regain all your other actions. So that's the basic cycle of the game. Use your actions, rest to get them back, move through a location, and kill some enemies. What makes this really, really strong is each scenario has a bunch of very specific rules to it that kind of fundamentally change your goals in the game. So for example, in the scenario we played, every so often as you progress down the track, at the end of every round, you're progressing this peril token, and once it hits certain spots, the nemesis of the dungeon is going to do some negative effect towards you. So along the way, before you hit those points, you're trying to contribute success tokens which you've earned in order to mitigate those effects.
Got it.
Along the way, you're also gearing up those cards. So each of those 4 cards can be upgraded to advanced versions, which will give you more dice, more interesting effects. Each character also has sort of interesting ways that they interplay with the card. So it might be that I might want to exhaust more cards before I rest so that I get more benefits from it. So there's a bunch of sort of fun different ways that the characters interact with that same basic system. But the joy in this game is in playing each of these different scenarios and finding these really kind of interesting twists on the rules that are going to change it up every time. Something that I've always found a little bit frustrating with even more traditional dungeon crawl games, and some of my favorites like Gloomhaven, is that they basically degenerate in just killing all the monsters. Yeah. This actually does a really good job of giving you different objectives, different sort of things to focus on. So you're mostly sort of trying to balance killing monsters versus the other objectives of the scenario, because there's effectively like a game clock before you're just taking an insurmountable amount of damage that you have to progress through the locations before that point. The one thing that Terrinoth does, which is pretty substantially different from Warhammer Quest, is Warhammer Quest is structured in a campaign where you're basically required to progress through multiple scenarios in order to get new cards. Terrinoth boils that down into a single scenario. So you're just playing these repeatable scenarios, and in the middle of them, you're getting upgraded cards. So it kind of condenses the arc of leveling up your character into a much shorter, more fulfilling game. There are a couple of other rule changes that I think are for the best that aren't worth going into. So overall, I was actually pleasantly surprised to find that despite the change of theme to something I cared a lot less about, I fundamentally liked what the game was doing much more than I enjoyed Warhammer Quest's campaign type structure. It made me want to like revisit even the same scenario just to like try a different character, try different upgrade cards, and then ultimately try all the different scenarios that there would be.
Can you scale the difficulty?
You mean just arbitrarily?
Well, I think the big question about co-op games is once it gets too easy, is it still fun?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure about that. That's a good question. The difficulty does scale by player count, but I don't know. I guess you could arbitrarily find some ways to scale it, because one of the things that playing with 3 players does versus 4, you always have 4 activations of your heroes. So you each go once and then one of you goes again, but it also boosts your health. So I guess you could just like decrement your health in order to like, make it harder.
Are they still making new card sets for this?
That's the big question for me, honestly, because I'm excited to pick this up, but under the assumption that they're going to continue to produce new content for it, right? I actually don't know that. I don't know how successful this was. I suspect it was substantially less successful than Warhammer Quest was, but if they are going to continue to produce new scenarios for it, then it seems like it would be something I'd be interested in picking up.
Here, Nealon, this might help you. Terrinoth is a land of forgotten greatness and lost legacies, once ruled by the Elder Kings who called upon mighty magics to perform great deeds and work marvels. The land has suffered greatly at the hands of its three great foes, the undead armies of Wykar the Betrayer.
Hey, this is Mark. I'm doing the editing right now. I cut all the rest of this out because it's extremely boring. If for any reason you want to listen to it, I'm going to put it at the end, although it's, again, extremely boring. But yeah, I just couldn't deal with any more of this. And no one was laughing, so you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, if Kellen's read there hasn't sold you on Terrinoth, I don't know what's gonna.
I literally thought this was a D&D property, honestly. I thought, I mean, I'm 99% sure it's not.
Yeah, but it may as well be.
Yeah.
It's, and to be clear, this is if you don't know anything about Terrinoth, it's the most generic medieval fantasy you can imagine. But, almost everything is. Like, you could argue the same thing about Warhammer, except Warhammer was in some ways the progenitor of a lot of modern medieval comic fantasy. But yeah, it doesn't take itself too seriously, I'll give it that. It's goofy in some ways. That is Heroes of Terrinoth by Fantasy Flight Games.
All right, so the moment you have all been waiting for, let us talk about the hotness, the hottest of the hotness, the belle of the ball, the twinkle in my eye, Tapestry from Stonemaier Games, a Jamie Stegmaier production. If you are not familiar, Tapestry is a civilization building game that is the hyped fall release for Stonemaier Games, makers of Scythe and Wingspan and Viticulture, some of the most beloved board games of all time. This has been extremely hyped up because it is a civilization game that has been billed as a 2-hour civilization game. So all of the fun things that you love in civilization games, tech trees and upgrades and conquest, but in a very shortened playtime. So we have just completed some of our first games of Tapestry. I know, Nealon, you have played multiple games and done the solo mode, but let's explain a little bit about what you do, and then we'll give you our true hot takes as we literally just finished. In Tapestry, there are 4 tracks for your tracks. So there is a technology track, an exploration track, a military track, and a science track. And each turn of the game, aside from gaining income, which will happen throughout the game, you'll be choosing one of those 4 tracks. You'll be paying resources and moving up on them. And what that does will depend on where you are in the track. There are 12 slots on each track, and they have some common actions. Most military actions involve some form of conquering, but there are other little bonuses that happen on that track. So military is predominantly focused with the middle of the board, which is a hexagonal grid where you can conquer territories. Exploration is involved with building the map out and exploring sort of the fog of war, so to speak, territories that you can't see. The science track is predominantly focused on kind of upgrading your other tracks and expounding and multiplying bonuses, kind of one of the fun science-y type tracks. And then the technology track gives you technology cards, which can help give you endgame bonuses as well as resources along the way. All the while you're doing this, you also have a capital city, and this is a la a Feast for Odin that is sort of on the side of your board. And as you reach certain milestones, whoever makes it to certain points of the track first is going to be gaining these incredibly detailed pre-painted miniatures and putting them on that Feast for Odin style 9x9 grid and trying to complete rows and columns to score incremental points. There's a lot going on. For how simple the game is, there is quite a bit of different things happening. On top of all of that, there is asymmetric player power, so everyone will start the game with a cool, unique way in which you'll score bonus points or how you can differ from other players. Each age of the game, so each time you complete the loop and gain income, you're playing new Tapestry cards, which will give you special powers for that age. I think that is all the major systems in Tapestry. Who wants to give their hot take first? And guys, the funny thing is we kind of go silent towards the end of the game because we save these hot takes for us talking together. So I actually don't know what they're going to say.
Go for it, Mark.
Okay. I feel like I need to reserve my real judgment until I play it again. My hot take is that it's fine. How hot is that? I felt like I was on the back foot early on, and I felt like I was trying to catch up in the middle, but I don't know. The swinginess of the Tapestry cards was something I wasn't expecting and sort of put me off. I don't know. For me, my hot take is it's a fine game. I can see why people like it. I want to play it again. I'm not itching to play it again, but it could certainly go up in my estimation upon further plays. I'm just not super jonesing for another game of it.
I've had a really sort of weird roller coaster of sort of feelings about this game, kind of.
Because you're in love with
No, it's just that my expectations for it went very quickly up and down based on my different points in the process. When I read the rules, I had this very immediate, honestly dejected feeling because it seemed incredibly simple, and I was like, this just doesn't seem good. It also seemed to like be dissolving a lot of the things that I like about a Civilization game. Maybe we'll come back to that, maybe we won't. I'm not surprised with Mark's reaction to it, and in some ways I'm pleased that Kellen had what seemed like a fantastic game of it. Kellen destroyed us.
Gotcha.
In his first game, because my first take after playing the game for the first time was it felt like a learning game in every sense of the word. Like I knew I was going to have a much better time of it on the second game, because honestly in the first game I didn't know what I was doing.
Oh yeah.
And you don't even know how important anything you're doing is until like halfway, even at the end of the game. So I had a much more solid idea of what I was going to be doing after the end of my first game. Kellen took to it immediately. The thing that surprised me as I played it is it became a very different game from what I imagined after reading the rules. The best parts of Tapestry are where you're sort of bouncing on multiple tracks and triggering bonuses that give you other things. So for example, you might advance on one track, which is going to give you a house, which you place on your board, which gives you a resource, which allows you to play the bonus, which will allow you to sort of do something else. And these things sort of compound on each other in interesting ways, especially because it very strongly depends on your position on multiple tracks at the same time. If I can sort of get an activation that's going to reactivate another position of the track, that could like lead to a very interesting bounce back. There are tech cards that do same things, and chaining those actions in fun ways is the puzzle of Tapestry. This is ultimately a resource efficiency puzzle game. I quite enjoy it. I think I am ultimately disappointed that it's not what I want from a Civilization game, and perhaps it is too long for its weight. But I enjoy the puzzle of it. It's kind of probably right up my alley in terms of feeling like a game where you want to set up interesting little combos on the tracks and have them play off each other in fun ways.
But a Civ game is not a puzzle game.
No, and that's my biggest problem with the game. I think actually mechanically, and I would say, dare say, not thematically, because it's obviously a Civ game in theme, it doesn't feel like what I want a Civilization game to be. Let's talk about this more a lot, maybe, because the things I think that are important about Civilization games are some of this conflict of area controls to some extent, like military and sort of momentous tech moments. Like a moment where you sort of discover a new technology and it's like, oh man, I've got planes now. Right. Come at me with your freaking gunpowder dudes. I've got like nuclear bombs. And those moments are cool. When you feel like you're significantly more advanced than another player and then you can just hammer down them with all your cool tech, that's good. The tech tracks in Tapestry aren't that. They're barely tech tracks. You move down a tech track that gives you a more powerful action than earlier in the space, but they're still fundamentally the same actions, just sort of remixes on them.
Yeah, the Tapestry cards to me felt most like some kind of technology that breaks the game.
Totally.
You know, I advanced really quickly up the science track, and I was just like, got. Like, I'm winning this one, and then Nealon pulls out this socialism Tapestry card, and of course Nealon would pull out socialism, a Tapestry card, and suddenly on any one track he could just move to my position, and he moved up, I think
something like that,
of a 12-point track, and I was so salty for like a half an hour because that had been my big advantage, and then he played socialism, and that was honestly, in my mind, the biggest moment of the game, which is actually my chief criticism is that there's just almost no interaction, almost literally none. The way in which you interact is through conquering on the board, but if you topple another player's piece, no one can ever topple that space again. That space is dead. So the amount of times that you can even have that interaction are kind of minimal. There's a race element to it, which if you've played Scythe, you'll be really familiar with, a race to milestones and a race to some victory objectives. My experience overall with Tapestry was I received it about as much as I thought I would, which is actually similar to a hot take from one of our friends on the Discord channel. I was the first Clund who made a cool Reddit post sort of saying, if you're going to like it already. I kind of knew what I was getting into. The way in which these tracks are set up, there are 4 tracks, and every action you take is scripted. So if you want to advance up the military track, you will be taking these 12 actions in order. That feels so on rails to me, and so the opposite, the antithesis of what a Civilization game could or should be. You can literally look, and it's so scripted out. So where the game actually is determining when to move up that track versus one of the other 4 tracks, as opposed to allowing a lot more free form and freedom. You know, if my criticisms of Scythe as a game that is very on rails at the beginning and feels like it has a turn 15 is when you're going to win Scythe between turn 15 and 20, this feels even more on rails than Scythe does. And the game also features a really interesting system where you could finish the game 20 minutes before the rest of the players. So your script, so to speak, is independent of any interaction with the other players.
Right.
As soon as you're out of resources or whenever you feel like it, you trigger an income round instead of taking a normal turn, but that pushes you towards the end of the game. I really felt like that sucked out a lot of the tension between our scores, because in a game where you're scoring on the score track as you go, there's always this sense of, oh, he's got 50 points, he's got 70, and who's winning? In this game, I was about a third of the game, maybe a fourth of the game ahead of Mark and Neelan almost the entire game, from about 20% in. And so it was very unclear to me whether I was significantly ahead of them or just a little ahead of them, but there was no way to sort of compare what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And I guess after subsequent plays, after 10 plays, you could look at someone and say, well, they're in their third income and I'm in my fourth, and sort of relatively adjust the points. But it just sucks out some of that scoring tension, because at the end it was just like, oh, I have 250 points. And maybe that's a function of me destroying Mark and Neelan so much in this game. But another thing I really disliked is I was the king of science until socialism happened, which has been the detriment of many civilizations. Is that once you get to the end of the science track, right? Once you've invested so heavily in science and you do that last cool action, I had the sudden realization, oh, I can't do science anymore. Like, there's an end, so you can't sit there at the top and exploit science, exploit your advantage in science. It's just over, and you've done that one, and now you have to go to another track. And that just feels like exactly the Stonemaier design decision that sands off the fun and interesting edges, where a Civilization game lets you combine this technology with that technology, and then you two are suddenly the score is 500 to 10 because I've unlocked the perfect combination of air conditioning and, aircraft carriers, and you never saw that synthesis coming. This is so much more on rails than that.
Yeah.
And it's not even trying to hide that. It's like, literally, here's your 4 track.
Right.
And go up your tracks. That's the game. But that's not to say it's not interesting. In a very Euro way, I'm excited to play it more.
I agree with a lot of what you said. The thing that I agree with the most is exactly what you said. When you get to the end of the track feeling like you can't utilize that technology repeatedly, there are ways to do that, to be clear. There are ways to reutilize tech spaces, but they're not as numerous as you'd want them to be. And they're typically tied to either tech cards or Tapestry cards. If there were more ways to sort of re-exploit your current position on the track, I think that could be incredibly interesting. And I wish that was more built into the game.
Well, and that's sort of the emergent fun of innovation, which is another game that is not a Civ game but pretends like it is.
Yeah.
But it has that, oh my God, this game went crazy. Remember the time that Neelan did that thing? And when we sit here and try to come up with, well, what was the big moment in our game of Tapestry, I don't think there were big moments. I don't think the game facilitates big moments. The game, to you, might go, I had a good, puzzly, efficient moment.
Right.
But I don't think there's any moment where everyone is standing in awe and looking at someone else's civilization.
I mean, I agree and disagree with that. There was definitely a moment in our game yesterday where the player who won, Brandon, had an incredible turn, but I think that's what you're describing. It was like, wow, you did this and then you did that and that combo of this, and you managed to gain like 30 points in a single, that's not what you're describing, like that big play where you would like manage to like completely one up another player. But it does have those moments. I just don't think they're necessarily as common as you'd want them to be.
I don't know. I feel like our game might have been a weird one. It felt like very snowball-y to me.
Yeah.
And because of the lack of interaction, really, there's not even Euro interaction in a blocking sense. The only blocking there is in this game really is
racing for landmarks.
Yeah, racing for landmarks, and a little bit of gaining tempo in terms of the toppling. So like the rich getting richer thing, it's hard to do anything to counteract it except for hoping for a Tapestry card that can swing it for you. Because even a tech card, they don't seem built for big catch up. Yeah, there's like gain a resource, gain points. There's not. Again, this is the first play. This is like completely hot, naive take, but that's just what I got on my first play.
And for what it's worth, I don't think that was necessarily an especially weird game, but one of the elements of interaction, which is, like you said, racing for landmarks, was somewhat neutered by Kellen's very strong early play, because he was like 3 spots ahead of us on like all the tracks based on an early Tapestry card.
Yeah.
Which fundamentally went against my asymmetric player power. I was the historians, and my goal was to send my historians to Mark and Neelan and then let them achieve those milestones so that I would get bonus victory points.
Well, how many points did you get off of that?
Less than 15. I got a couple resources too, though.
Right. So I got 20 points off of mine. I could have gotten 40, but that would require playing the game exactly as I guessed I would at the beginning. So I don't know. Even if I had done that efficiently, that would have been another 20 points. But it's not even about the points. It's not even about the end scoring. It's about the, once you're behind, what can you do except for hope for a lucky Tapestry card to catch up? I don't know what you can really do. I guess you could combo and that could advance you, but I don't know about catching up.
What do you mean by catch up? Because where you're at in the game, like on any one turn, you're saying if you adjusted for everyone being on the same turn of the game, so to speak. Because I was 6 turns away from ending the game and you were 10 turns away from ending the game. So our scores weren't analogous at that moment.
Right. I just never felt like my Tapestry cards, and I went through a lot of them. I obviously placed out 4 and I had another 5 that I got during the game. I never felt like I had anything that was like a big gain. I didn't feel like I had any especially strong ones. And again, I'm probably playing the game incorrectly. Like, I don't know. I just felt...
So the big move then of the game, in your mind, was my first Tapestry card.
Yeah, I think that was a huge...
I think that was because to me that felt very strong. And like, obviously you set yourself up in ways to make that as maximally beneficial as possible. But
yeah.
And then that snowballed. And without substantive interaction, like all you could have done was try to come over and conquer my areas, but that wouldn't have taken away too many points.
Like, there's an argument in terms of like making this analogous to Food Chain Magnate, where you can lose early, right? And the idea being that you can try to mitigate that in Food Chain Magnate through interaction. There, I feel like you're more in control of your destiny, I think. And it just felt lucky. Not lucky. It just felt like I was trying to get Tapestry cards. I was trying to draw Tapestry cards, and that just felt a little deflating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly, there are quite a few die rolls in the game. It feels kind of like viticulture in that sense for me, where I don't understand why people accept the card draw in viticulture for being like a low midweight Euro game. It feels like it has too much reliance on card draw. This game has the Tapestry cards, it has your special power cards, and then every time you do a military action, you're rolling dice and choosing an option of what to take. Let's talk about the production for just a minute. I know that we'll come back to Tapestry. I know that I'll play it again for sure. I'd like to. But this game is $100?
I think that's the MSRP, yeah.
It's $100. It has huge pre-painted miniatures. It has tons of components. And it doesn't need any of them, right?
I think that's fair. I have a hard time justifying the price of this game. I think it is... If you've played a Terramara game, you know that their productions are incredible. Tapestry is no slouch. The miniatures are beautiful. I think there's a weird incongruity in the art design. Like, there are 3 different art styles, it seems, that just get mashed together: the miniatures, the board, and the cards. Aside from that, the miniatures are probably the majority of that price, and all they're doing are being like effectively Palominos on your board. Like, they could have been Feast for Rodent type tiles.
It could have been paper that you like mark with a pencil. I mean, it's like a roll and write, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Totally. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, the much cheaper version of this is getting rid of all of the plastic and just making that a pad of paper. Yeah, totally. I don't know if the game justifies its price. I think I was surprised by how interesting it is. I don't think there's anything I can think of that is quite like it, which is not what I was expecting. But it's a hard sell at $100.
I also cannot stand this. It comes with a 4-page rule book and then 2 iconography, or basically the 4 tracks. Each turn, your decision is, which of these 4 tracks should I go up? And the iconography for that is facing the 4 different players around the board, and you literally can't read the tech track that's completely across from you because it's upside down and far away, and it's on the board, and it's one of your 4 choices.
Yeah, I didn't have that much of a problem with it. I honestly, like, after the first game, I basically knew what most of the spots did except for the ones close to the ends of the tracks.
You knew in order the 48 actions that the game allowed.
No, but I could, by glancing at the track, even from across the board, know what they were doing.
I think there's so many other production design choices that you could do there, whether that's giving players a hand of cards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there are a bunch
strange.
of things that could be clearer and more streamlined about it. In fact, I actually want to straight up say that the 4-page rulebook is bad. There are things that aren't clarified in it, and the reliance on the reference guide is a little bit absurd.
Yeah, but a very interesting first play, and one I'm sure we will all be playing again.
Yeah, unlike Wingspan, which is a game I knew wasn't for me, Tapestry is a game that I feel quite compelled to play more of.
You think it has legs for you?
I think it does. I genuinely think it does. I don't think it's ever going to be one of my favorite games, but I'm intrigued by it.
Well, this is the mid section of our show where we plug our listeners for writing beautiful reviews, and we plug our sponsors. So thank you so much to Target.com. Target is a website where you can buy anything you want, more premium than Walmart, and pretend that you are classier than those who shop at Walmart, but it's barely better. Target.com.
That's their tagline. That's their new tagline. That's right out of Minneapolis.
One of the best ways that you can support the show is by writing a review. We try to read all of them. You can leave reviews on Facebook. You can leave reviews on iTunes. It's a fun way to provide feedback and also align yourself with the tank. So that would be #RedTank for anyone listening. So this review is from iTunes, and it comes to us from Takju, Takgo, Chakju. Don't resist their innovation and bibliosness. Bibliociousness.
Keep saying the word.
Like it's delicious, but bibliociousness.
Perfect.
Over the years, I've subscribed to 20 board game-related podcasts. There have only been 3 that I listen to from end to end, and Board Game Barrage is one of them. Clearly, these guys get a lot of things right. Exhibit A, episodes are rarely over an hour, and the conversations are always focused on board games. Nothing here about whiskey or home improvement projects or someone's favorite hockey team. Well, Mark does
Kings.
talk about soccer.
Kings.
But it's not
Liverpool.
Hawker. Exhibit B, they talk like real people. They aren't tryhards who talk in zany voices. Or make up songs about meeples. That's true. We don't make up songs. Their conversations sound just like the ones you have with your buddies on game night. Exhibit C, each tank brings a different perspective to the table, so you're bound to find one of your gaming tastes aligning with yours. Exhibit D, they do all this and still bring the public between the sheets reporting news about upcoming artists and ha takes. BGB will be in my ear holes for as long as they're a thing. I have never said the word ear holes, and
Somebody upset
for making me say that word. This is very kind and definitely gets to the heart and ethos of some of the hidden rules that are in the show Bible for Board Game Barrage.
Thank you very much. That's a great review.
I've never done a zany voice on the show.
Not even once.
A Sandy Peterson game. So let us move on to our featured topic this week, which is in anticipation of Essen SPIEL 2019, taking place in Essen, not Essen SPIEL, because that second word means play. We're going to be counting down the top 5 games that we would be purchasing if we were at Essen SPIEL. We want to get right to it and talk games. Mark, your number 5, most anticipated.
My number 5 game comes from Danielle Taschini of
Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, depending on who you ask.
Teotihuacan fame. Also a designer of Marco Polo. This is, and I'm going to butcher another name here, it's Trismegistus. Trismegistus. So give that one a shot at home. So like Marco Polo, this is also a dice-based game. This is a dice drafting game. A thing that drew this game to me, aside from the designer, which was a big draw, is it has like a magical make potions sort of theme to it. It's dice drafting. From what I understand, what you can do on your turn is either draft a die or activate a die that you've drafted currently. So that it would seem like an interesting take on dice drafting. The dice are all custom. None of them have pips on it from what I understand. So I guess when you activate a die, it may be like create a potion or something like that. So I like the idea that it's designed by Danielle Taschini. I love the games he made before. I like the theme. And I also like this seemingly interesting take on dice drafting. So that is Trismegistus. Trismegistus.
I admit I sort of maybe glossed over this one because if I'd known there was a Tuscany game, then I would have been a lot more excited. Sounds cool. My number 5 game is The Magnificent. This is by Porter Games, who I'm not super familiar with. They previously designed Santa Maria, which is from a couple of years ago. I've heard quite good things about. The Magnificent is about putting on a performance, some sort of circus-type act where you're hiring performers.
A magical act?
Potentially a magical act. Thanks for stealing my bit. You're sort of advertising for performers to come to your performance. You're hiring them. You're sort of putting on these shows. But the game is one of dice drafting and Palomino tile laying. So it's an interesting theme mixed with 2 mechanics that I like a lot. So this is maybe my wildcard pick, but I'm excited to find out more about The Magnificent.
You know how to advertise your medieval magician act?
Uh-huh.
I would say, come all to the South African Victorian magician, Neelan.
I love it.
I was going to go with you're a wizard, Neelan. But I think yours is better. My number 5 game that I most anticipated for Essen SPIEL is called Welkin. This is a made-up place, so I can't make that pronunciation wrong.
Like Essen.
That's right. This game is called Welkin SPIEL. You are dreaming about evading the islands, traveling in the sky. So this is a light, family-ish weight game of set collection, of converting different types of resources. It is beautiful. Light game, but it features commodities that have values that adjust based on the market. So based on how many people are buying and selling different types of resources. So one could say that I hope that Welkin is BTB, better than Biblios, because this is such a fascinating concept to me. It's featured in some of my favorite games like Archipelago, which is the resources you want to acquire have fluctuating values and how you deal with that. So this is a gorgeous production. This features that and it's lightweight, so I'm really excited to check out Welkin.
If you think Welkin is going to beat Biblios, you're out of your mind.
I already know it beats Biblios.
Welkin?
I know.
Welkin.
I already know.
Can you spell Welkin? It's probably spelled Welkin.
Yeah, it does have
garbage.
It does have a poor
name.
name.
What a garbage name. That's even worse than Trismegistus or whatever the hell I had earlier. Welkin. Welkin is going to be Biblios?
I'm seeing nice little family game on a couple of these reviews.
Garbage. Garbaggio. Okay, number 4. Back to good games. Terramara. This is a worker placement game. The thing I like...
We just got to keep doing zany voices today. We've done like 7 for...
This is a worker placement game that has 2 big draws for me in terms of how it handles worker placement. The first one is that up to 2 workers can go in a spot, so you're not blocking with your first worker. But if anybody else wants to go in a spot with you, they must have a higher military strength than the player currently in there. So that seems like an interesting take on worker placement. It's not quite blocking, it's not quite bumping, but it's sort of in the middle.
Lancaster-esque, except you both share it.
You both share it, but the invading player must have a higher military than the current player in there. So that just seems interesting to me. The other thing is that there are 5 worker placement tracks, so that the worker placement spots are on 5 tracks on the board, and you can place your worker on any spot you want, but the 5th track, the one 5th down from the top, will only trigger in the 5th round. And those are the strongest actions. So if you want an action that's very strong, it's likely to be one that comes up late. So you're sacrificing a worker for the majority of the game to guarantee that you're getting this action. So that just seemed a very interesting way to balance out timing and worker placement. Seemed like an interesting take that I hadn't seen earlier. So that is my number 4 game, Terramara.
If number 5 was my wild card pick, then this is maybe a safer pick for number 4. This is Rush MD. This is the successor to Kitchen Rush by Artipia Games by David Turchi. Kitchen Rush is a really fun real-time cooperative game where you're running a restaurant. So you're placing workers, which are basically little sand timers, like the 30-second sand timers. As you place a worker, you take the action, you have to wait for time to run out before you can move it again. So you're frantically sort of waiting to be able to do the things you need to do before time runs out for the round. Kitchen Rush takes this theme, which I didn't care much about, and moves it to a hospital. So this seems to be like replicating Theme Hospital, which is one of my favorite video games, and the mini games sort of take up the action spots, just feel like more substantive and more interesting. So I'm excited to see how this one shakes out. That is Rush MD.
Public service announcement about Neelan. When he wasn't wishing he was a Victorian magician, he was watching House reruns and wishing he was a medical doctor.
Factually true.
My number 4 game that I am most excited about coming out of Essen is the yearly Days of Wonder release. They swung and missed with Corinth, but hopefully they can bring us back with Deep Blue. Deep Blue is beautiful. I think I'm the most swayed by gorgeous components of artwork of the BGB trio, but it is a game of diving and sort of some shared incentives where you might dive on a space, but other players will also be able to acquire some resources from the dive that you've gone on. It's just a gorgeous board. These games always play in an hour. Days of Wonder has done Ticket to Ride, Yamatai, and Five Tribes. You know that it's going to be a cohesive game that's been well play-tested.
Yeah, polished.
So I'm very excited to check out Deep Blue.
My number 3 game is Paranormal Detectives. This is a party deduction game. That sounds like my kind of party. This is a lot like Mysterium in that there's a player who is acting as the ghost who cannot speak, and the other players are trying to deduce who did the crime and how and where and with what, that kind of thing.
Do a spooky ghost voice. What's the guy's name? Do a spooky voice for Takju.
So, like Mysterium, the ghost can't speak, but you're trying to get information from them. How do you get information from the ghost is the question that you are asking or should be asking. The answer is that you tell the ghost that you're looking for some piece of information, and then the ghost can give you the information in one of 4 weird ways. The weird ways are 1, using a hangman's knot. What does that mean? I don't know, but it sounds interesting. 2, tarot cards. That's very straightforward, Mysterium style, I would assume. 3, a word puzzle. Now, another weird one, like hangman's knot. So somehow it gives you a word puzzle, and you're supposed to deduce information from that. And 4, drawing by holding your hand when they draw. So that is all weird stuff, but sounds very interesting. And so my number 3 is Paranormal Detectives.
That was creepy. I like the look of this a lot, actually. This is close to being on my list. It looks really silly. My number 3 game is Roam and Roll. Another David Turczi joined, actually. I didn't realize that. But yeah, so this is by 2/3 of the team that gave us Welcome to Dino World, which is a game I like a lot. This is David Turczi and Nick Shaw for PSC Games. Roam and Roll is a roll and write style game where you roll a bunch of dice up front and then draft 2 at a time. But you're all working on a shared board. So there's a map of Rome after it burns, and Nero asks you to reconstruct Rome. So you do this by...
Wait, Nero's asking you? What the hell are you doing what Nero's asking you to do?
I don't know.
He a fiddling while
Rome burned, and then he's like, build it all back.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, sorry.
So then what you're doing is you're drawing buildings onto this map, but obviously you're stealing space from other people because it's a shared map. So it seems to be taking the structure of a roll and write game mixed with a heavier Euro game in the vein of something like Welcome to Dino World, but introducing a ton of interaction to it, which sounds like something that I think is typically missing from the genre, and something that sounds real cool to me.
Yeah, that's not cool.
That is Roam and Roll.
My number 3 game from Essen that I am excited to check out is one that I thought would be higher on Mark's list. This game is called Offshore.
I've not heard of this.
So Offshore stuck out to me for a couple of reasons. It is a game for 3 to 5 players. When something has a higher player count, I actually get more excited.
I do
for
too.
it.
If it doesn't have 2, I'd like that a lot more.
Right.
Right.
And so in the game of Offshore, it is supposedly a light, medium weight game of drilling for oil off the Norwegian coast. So it's a little environmentally controversial, let's say, but
Okay.
but what you're doing is you're acquiring technology, you're exporting oil from the ocean, or you're opening a new oil field and drilling for oil. But what happens here is that opening these new oil fields are very expensive. So you and other players will have to form partnerships in order to drill in for that oil. And the function of drilling for oil is some sort of mini press your luck game where the further down you go, the more oil that you're acquiring.
Oh, okay.
But whether you want to cooperate with other players or whether you want to try to go it alone, this just strikes me as very interesting. This is from Aporta Games, and my God, Mark, we're going to be
The
playing.
hell of a cover.
We're going to be playing Offshore,
Looks cool.
and I will not be partnering with Neelan. I will be partnering with Mark.
There you go. Sounds good to me.
I'll be drilling for oil with not a magician.
And you're saying that is light to medium?
Yeah.
Is how it's okay. That's interesting. That didn't go naturally in my head as a light to medium description, but that's, but if it is, that's very interesting.
This light, accessible game about offshore drilling.
Right.
Yeah. It's the natural theme.
Make it easy for children.
There you go. I'm going to move away from the silliness of my number 3 game, Paranormal Detectives, and go for tried and true with my number 2. This is Glen More II as my number 2. That is Synergy. This is a game from Matthias Kramer, who is one of the titans of board game design, in my opinion. This is obviously the sequel to Glen More, which is a classic game. Glen More is a game that I've only played once, but I enjoyed quite a bit. It's one of those old Euros that feels like classic, that feels like nothing is wasted. It's just a game I'm very, very interested in. This is using the same fundamental mechanic of Glen More, which was whoever's last in line can move up to grab a tile, and whatever tile you grab, you place it in your tableau, and everything surrounding that tile activates, which is like the fundamental action that you do in Glen More. This is like what I was talking about last week, a game that I know comes from a very strong foundation, sort of like Irish Gauge. So I am excited to play Glen More II.
My number 2 game is Maracaibo. We spoke about Capstone earlier. They're way up in my ranks of publishers to keep my eye on it, and Maracaibo is no exception. This is by Mr. Pfister himself, Alexander Pfister, who is the designer of Mombasa.
Mr. Pfister himself?
Mr. Pfister himself. Exactly. He is the designer of Mombasa, Great Western Trail, Isle of Skye. These are games I love. The theme for this is one I also of historical themes is one I have some affinity for. Like, I love mercantile trading in like the 17th century, pirates, privateers, exploration. Something about that theme specifically speaks to me when I don't typically like historical themes. So you're sailing around the map, delivering goods, establishing trade routes, presumably. I think you can be pirates. The description mentions combat. I'm not sure. It's hard to be exactly sure about this, but I am excited for a heavy Eurogame by Capstone and Alexander Pfister. That is Maracaibo.
All right, let's get to the serious games. My number 2. What do you think of when you hear the word Kakerlaken?
Cockroaches.
You think of the amazing games Cockroach Poker and Royal Cockroach Poker, but as we call it here in the colonies, Kakerlaken Poker. They have a new game called Kakerlaken. Let me finish.
Sorry for interrupting you.
Sushi. Oh my God. When these guys invoke Kakerlaken, I pay attention. Kakerlaken Sushi is a new game in the amazing series of bug games that come in square boxes. In this game, there is some element of bluffing where everyone has sort of a bowl and dice are rolled in the middle, and there's a cockroach sushi chef in the middle there.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
How could you not buy this game, Mark?
That looks amazing.
I'm ordering it now, actually.
You are saying that, I'll trade for that in 2 years because you're a idiot. This is a day one pre-order, Mark. That is Kakerlaken Sushi, Cockroach Sushi. It's going to be my game of the year. And it's my number 2 game that I'm most excited about at Essen.
This is my number 1 game, and this is going to be a shout-out sort of to First Clund again. He's getting a lot of play on our podcast, First Clund of Discord. Name a London-based soccer team. Neelan.
Manchester United.
Okay, not Arsenal. That's one of them, but that's not the one I'm thinking about. Kellen.
Wait, they're not a London-based soccer team. God, I feel so embarrassed.
What?
Manchester United.
Are you serious? You thought they were London-based?
I just thought you meant English for a second.
No.
I just shouted
Kellen,
out the
name a
first
London-based
thing.
soccer team. Chelsea? No, not Chelsea. Neelan, name a London-based soccer team. West Ham? No, not West Ham. And Kellen, name a London-based soccer team.
We were told not to
Tottenham.
talk about sports teams.
So those are those are 4 London-based soccer teams, but there's another one, and this is one of First Clund's favorite teams, Crystal Palace. This game is called Crystal Palace. It has nothing to do with soccer, but I wanted to interject soccer if I could. So this is a Marco Polo-esque game, from what I understand. It's like you have dice at the beginning of the game, but instead of rolling the dice, it's pure manipulation. So I don't think you roll them at all. I think they may start at 3. I'm not really sure. But in this game, 6s, I think, are strictly the best, better than 1s, for example. But you have to sacrifice points or something in order to raise the point level of your pips. So it feels like Marco Polo without the dice rolling. It's got a World's Fair theme that seems really interesting, like inventions and stuff like that. It just struck me as Marco Polo with less randomness, which seems like really interesting. And I love the idea of a game being based in the World's Fair with all these like kooky inventions. It's even like a little historical because they mention like inventors of the past. So this one is for First Clund, Crystal Palace, number 1 game. Neelan.
My number 1 game is Perseverance, the Castaway Chronicles. This is by Mind Clash. Funny story about this. At Gen Con, 2 dudes from Mind Clash ran up to us near the end of the convention, and one of them was so excited to tell me about Perseverance, and it sounds crazy, and I'm way on board for it. The premise is that there is a Eurogame, which is the first in a series of 5 games. Each of these 5 completely different games that they're going to be releasing is going to be telling a story, advancing the game thematically, but also sort of forming a loose campaign. This is not a legacy game in any form, but the idea is you would play the first in the series of the games. When the second one comes out, you would play that, and if you wanted to, the results of the first game could carry forward to the second game, which would carry forward to the third game, which would carry to the fourth and the fifth. And the game is changing and evolving thematically and mechanically as the story of this game progresses. You wash up on an island of dinosaurs, some mysterious island. It sounds crazy, and I got the rundown of all 5 games of it from one of the designers, and it sounds nuts, and I'm excited for it.
Interesting. This reminds me of a game that I was really excited for from a couple of years ago called Origins, I think. And the idea was you play the first game, and based on what happened there, the second game would be affected or whatever. But that game never took off. I guess it never got developed. So this is something I'm very curious about. And this seems a little kookier. You got like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The theme is a little bit off the rails.
Yeah.
And
cool.
and Mindclash have solid mechanical Euro games.
Sure.
So it's I'm definitely just excited for it. Yeah.
This sounds like Lost.
I think it's in the vein of something more like an Ark, if you know that video game, where it's like you're like literally running around taming and riding dinosaurs and stuff like that, getting new technology. It's weird.
You had a lot of strange dreams as a child, Neelan.
Thank you.
All right, the best for last, the game that must have been taken off of their list, because how could they not have put this on their list? A game from the only true and living doctor, Reiner Knizia.
Is this the map game?
No.
Okay.
It's Babylonia.
Okay, here's another game coming up.
Well, Babylonia, Mark, is being described as samurai mixed with Through the Desert with a smidgen of Taj Mahal.
Okay.
It looks beautiful. It looks awesome. There is a rule book you can read, but I started reading it, and then I was like, no, I'll let Neelan read the rule book. I don't need to do that. It looks, to me, from a casual read-through of the rules, as a little less intensive samurai. Maybe a little more Blue Lagoon injected, where there's more ways to score points. My hope for this, in a similar way that Yellow and Yangtze is a Care Bear version of Tigris and Euphrates, and in a way that Blue Lagoon is a Care Bear version of Through the Desert, if this is samurai, but with a little bit of the conniving, crazy mathematical calculating endgame, if this is that, but take one step back, I am all on board for Babylonia from the only true and living doctor, Dr. Reiner Knizia.
That sounds great.
My God, I'm so happy. That's going to do it for this episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. We have to finish because we have to get it under an hour because you told us that's all you care about. You can find us on Discord. It's a great place to chat with us, boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. We are always there. We will talk to you. You can find us on all major social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much, Heart Society, for your song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. We'll be at Chuck's. We'll be recording at Chuck's. We'll be recording at Chuck's 2019 with Quentin Smith as a special guest on the podcast.
I actually don't think we've said that on the podcast as yet.
Holy
That's obviously crazy exciting.
Yep, super excited for that.
Terrified, personally, but excited.
Bye. In addition, we're going to be covering the top 5 games that we would be purchasing, that we would be running around acquiring at Spiel 2019.
Did you say Essen?
Isn't it Essen Spiel?
Essen Spiel, yeah.
I don't know.
What
does Essen mean? Spiel means play.
Essen
right?
is the name of a city.
Essen's a place.
Essen's a city.
Yeah.
Play.
Essen play, yeah.
That makes no sense.
The convention's called play.
Okay, it needs to be in America so we can go to it. The demon-possessed hordes of the bloodthirsty Uthuk Yalalan and the terrifying dragons of the Molten Heath. Many of its great cities have been cast down into ruins, and many wondrous secrets and powerful artifacts have been lost. Let me finish. For hundreds of years, Terrinoth slipped into doom and decay, but heroes arise just when the land needs them most. Courageous adventurers brave the ruins of past ages and the foul creatures within to uncover the treasures of their ancestors. The Dakan barons, inheritors of the ancient kingdom, rebuild their walls and muster their armies, while the wizards of Greyhaven gather runes of power to awaken guardians of stones and steel. These preparations come none too soon, for the ancient enemies of the lawful races are stirring again, and Terrinoth needs champions of courage and cunning to stand against the rising darkness.
Well, thank goodness for that.
It's no Warhammer.
I'm just excited for when they lose Star Wars and we have to read some bullshit.
Oh yeah, extemporize.